Hello and welcome dear students. Today we will focus on the topic sources of study and environment history. The focus of the study will be on the survey of literature regarding the awareness of the environment, various methodologies adopted during the pre-colonial and colonial periods. Dear students, the history of the environment is an exploration of society-nature interaction. The focus of the current topic is to do a general survey of the major writings on the environment history of India. It is worth noting that the first texts in the field of environment history concentrated primarily on the history of humans, with little provided to environmental concerns. It was with the growth of the scientific revolution and enlightenment in Europe that a shift in the history writing became evident, and the story of evolution, taking into consideration the environmental factors, began to find a visible place. However, it was only in the period after the First World War that historical writings incorporating geographical factors as influencing historical developments appeared. A systematic exploration in this direction started with the establishment of the Annales School in France. It was here that the trend was initiated of investigating history in the wider context of the prevailing environmental conditions. Similarly, the movement against the pollution provided space for the environmental concerns in history writing in America. But despite all this, it is also the case that only in the past 25 years or so have historians methodologically pursued a systematic exploration of this interchange, that is, interchange of humans with their natural environment, in the process establishing a distinct branch of history, that's an environmental history. We have tried to attempt a broad survey of the available major literature and have tried to distinguish as clearly as possible the trends therein. Dear students, we will be talking of survey of literature. The words environment and history have been subjected to extensive efforts at definition during the past 20 years or so. It is possible to have hard and soft approaches regarding environmental history. The hard approach might suggest that environmental history necessarily involves an examination of environmental dynamics through a human agency in which the change is quantifiable in some shape or form. A softer approach would suggest perhaps that change could be conditional, even where data are not available. Interactions with the environment may also be frozen in a narrow time scale where change is less significant. A closer examination of the writings appearing under the rubric of environmental history makes it clear that the documentation of the ecological change or disturbances caused by the introduction of colonialism have dominated the discourse, though there are few important abbreviations too. Most of the works on the environmental history have located their study to analyze the disruptions in the traditional way of living as caused by forces and consequences of industrialization. In case of India, these disruptions were caused by colonialism, and some have continued even after independence. The loss of natural flora and fauna and the explanation of the causes and effects have been the major concerns of environmental historians working on the modern India. Now, dear students, we will be talking about the methodologies. The above stated principles and concerns have been the defining features of environmental history, and these have been most vigorously put into practice in the case of forestry. Deforestation and associated climatic change have proved to be a vibrant zone. The conflict over classification of traditional rights and claims of tribals and their relationship with the state polity, initially with the pre-colonial state and later on with the colonial state, has been useful add-ons. The domination of these issues in environment history can be gauged by the following acceptance by the editors of the Nature and the Orient, that we make no apology for devoting so much of the book to the history of relationship between forests, people and the state, and the history of discourse and ideology of colonial forestry in India, Burma and Malaysia. Moreover, the forest history of subcontinent and South Asia varies extremely from area to area and sources of study. We feel it necessary to highlight these differences and make a start at producing a series of detailed and empirical environmental histories, concentrating quite deliberately on the forest sector. The systematic beginning of the environmental history writing in India that also set the tone for the future writing is invariably associated with Ramachandra Guha and Madhav Gadgil's seminal monograph in this featured land written that was written in 1992. They suggested that the resource utilization was in harmony with the nature and resource sharing among various strata of the society that was very cordial in pre-colonial India. The caste society with the different claims on the different resources led to a state of equilibrium, in turn providing stability to the resource demand and supply. Dear students, caste was also seen as consisting of endogamous groupings that were each marked by a particular economic activity and a particular ecological niche. The analysis of the various environmental movements was explained in terms of disruptions caused by the British, as it was argued elsewhere that in pre-British times there was little or no interference with the customary use of forest and forest produce. Dear students, Guha and Gadgil thus portrayed an idealized image of the human-environment interaction in the Indian context. The transition from the study of events and watershed occurrences to the study of processes and explorations of deeper continuities from an ecological point of view was a gradual process. In this, the concern shifted to asking how and why certain kinds of livelihood patterns or production methods survived and how others were transformed. By replacing the study of events, thus the process had begun to occupy the center stage. Moreover, early writers were more concerned with the protection of the environment, as they had been actively supporting the cause of the conservation of the environment. Thus, they looked for evidence of a popular protests against the exploitation and often neglected the contrary evidence. South Asian works have often been focused on certain themes at the expense of others. The forest rather than the agriculture, movements of Adivasis and marginal peasants rather than the changing responses of the urban dwellers, or histories of irrigation as opposed to conflict over water rights, etc. Sumit Guha has tried to bridge the gap between the pre-British and British periods. His area of study has been the region dominated by Marathas, where rich repositories of Maratha documents have been put to excellent use. At the same time, he has also avoided the illusionary divide between the forest and agriculture and notions of ethnicity in the wider context of the environment. Further, he has also pointed out that the pattern of living has modified the environment of the region, as he demonstrates that the use of fire and the keeping of cattle were practiced here for at least 40 centuries. In the process, a thorny forest region was transformed into seasonal grassland. The ecology was reshaped in major ways. He has also argued that it is important to keep in mind that in South Asia, a past relatively small area was under permanent tillage, and the much larger percentage of land was often in the state of transition, at least in the pre-modern period. In the analysis of the state's perspective of land, it has been pointed out that even in the pre-British period, the rulers like the Marathas saw the forest as an obstacle. Jungle clearance has been equated in terms of fresh revenue possibilities, though it had been a problematic and difficult task. Dear students, now we will be talking about pre-colonial periods. The broad survey of the writings on the environmental concerns in India cannot ignore the contributions made by the historians working on the pre-colonial period. The issue of the marginal has been addressed with special reference to the pastoral, tribal, hunter, etc. One historian, Francis Zimmerman, has examined ancient texts to construct the ecology of the period. He has questioned the practice of equating the term jungle with forest. Zimmerman has also explored the suggested ecological references from the ancient texts, where animals are classified into two groups. One, Jangla, those of the dry lands, and second, Unupa, those of the marshy lands. Similarly, Aloka Parashar Sen has tried for the Mauryan period to understand how the state perceived the forest dwellers and sought to subordinate and assimilate them. Dear students, geography and the perceived existence of the hostile tribes defined the frontiers of the empire, and both had to be mastered for the expansion and integration of the state. The other major concern has been the study of social formations, and it has been influenced by the methodologies and tools deployed by anthropology and archaeology. One historian, Ranbir Chakravarti, has highlighted the role of hydraulic management in the process of settlement in ancient period. Few writers have probed the significance of pre-colonial water system, particularly in North and Northwest India. David Hardiman suggests that small dam system of irrigation exists in the past, which was sustained over longer periods. Similarly, David Mossey has examined the interplay of developmental politics to explain the level and process of state intervention. The role of community-based programs to tackle the contentious use like management and allocation of the common property, resources like water bodies, etc. have also been examined. Dear student, a serious influence on the man-environment studies in the medieval India has been of the annals. Influences of the environment and social formation have been a major area of exploration for the annals. Since the very beginning of the movement, we can trace the attempts made by the contributors to explore the newer kinds of resources to analyze the role played by the environment in historical developments. They have tried to place the role of environment in the wider settings of the social formations and have not remained confined to the colonial impact only. They also attempt to exceed the barrier of medieval and modern history and have been more comfortable with a whole range of human activities in the place of mainly political history. Harbans Mokhia is credited with making annals popular in India by translating the writing of French historians along with Maurice Aymard. Similarly, Mike Kumar has also attempted to examine the interaction between the environment and society in medieval Rajasthan. He has questioned the notion that traditional societies always practiced methods aimed at the judicious use of natural resources and has cited several cases of exploitation of nature by traditional societies in Rajasthan. He also cautions that the magnitude of exploitation of natural resource did multiply manifold under the impact of the Industrial Revolution. Similarly, one should not overstress the role of human agency in influencing the environment. Ramachandra Guha and David Arnold have suggested that moving more firmly within the parameters of environmental history, there is the study of human engagement over time with the physical environment as context, agent and influence in human history. Now, dear students, we will be talking about the study sources in the colonial period. It is important to note that the whole discourse of the colonial historiography has been, and its later proponents have tried to analyze history in the terms of evolutionary time scale, while succession from the primitive to tribal to creation of colonial administrators to the state have been unidirectional and mutually contradictory process. In this context, Ajay Sakaria's writings deserve serious consideration. He determined that the relation between the tribal people and state has been located in terms of interaction between civilized and primitive. He also highlights the general negligence of the marginal areas and lack of importance given the traditional issues. He tries to locate the problems of marginal issues in the context of politics of growth and finds that the same is important for the construction of ideas such as Bengali, tribal or primitive. He questions the notion whereby tribals were equated with wild and primitive and settled agriculture under the patronage of the state with civilizations. He also explores the interdependence between state and tribal polities where revenue rights and authority were shared in the complex web of relationships. Shiva Ramakrishna's work is a further advance on the issue of forest and colonial policy. He tries to locate the issue within the context of the debate that followed with the attempt to formulate the Private Forest Bill between 1865 and 1878. Dear students, underplay of various social, economic and environmental concerns made the whole debate so complex that ultimately the bill could not be formatted. The major issues involved in this debate were property rights sanctioned by the permanent settlement, and that now any attempt to withdraw or curtail the same would lead to greater resentment. These forests were often termed as Jungle Mahal, hence accepted as private property. This was the period when forests were sought after due to wood, which was in great demand because of railways. Initially, with the formation of the permanent settlements, it was expected that the marginal lands would also be put to better and positive uses. But it was not the case in eastern India. So there was a demand for a private forest policy. There were conflicting issues at stake. On the one hand, an attempt was made through the permanent settlement to maximize land revenue, but soil conservation and forest production were also important. Dear students, the other conflict visible was the claims of the riayat over the forest produce, which were recognized by tradition. The landlords, on the other hand, argued that it leads to the degradation of forest and soil erosion. Conservation of the private forest to protect forest would lead to the denial of claims to riayat, but would meet the simultaneous demand generated by the expanding railways, further complicating the issue of traditional claims versus commercial exploitation. The importance of his approach lies in the thorough exploration of the conflicting interest vis-à-vis natural resources. There were several supplicants, and the state had to consider several probabilities before arriving at any formal policy. He also reported the debate over environmental considerations. It was not only scientific knowledge about forests that participated in the debate, but various self-interests also tried to oppose the issue and mend the policy in their favor. Similarly, Ravi Rajan points out the internal divisions in the colonial perspective. The so-called colonial policy has not been a monolithic structure, and there were quite evident heterogeneous views. The author has very clearly pointed out internal divisions in the colonial policy by examining the deliberations at the Empire Forestry Conference on the two crucial colonial agroecological policy concerns, shifting cultivation and soil erosion from 1920 to 1950. Dear students, the problem of the conservation of the forests had been of immense significance, especially in the 1930s, due to the experience of the Dust Bowl. Examples from the West Africa were cited to point out the benefits of shifting cultivation, but citing the nature of forest in India put it aside. The political damage caused by the shifting cultivation was its inducing nomadic habits on parts of the local population, discouraging agricultural progress and facilitating the evasion of taxes. The problems caused by the shifting cultivation were not only tax evasion, but the larger issue of timber, trade and supply to cater to the needs of the British was also at the center stage. To tackle the problem, scientific studies were encouraged. But given the social roots of the technical experts, it was asserted that the nature of their technical intervention was by no means value neutral. Dear students, the reconstructions of forest histories also need to pay close attention to local and regional peculiarities. In this direction, Ajit Menon has pointed out that the forest-dependent communities view land in terms not so much of ownership but of use. He suggests that the process of colonization depends both on the state's ability to take over large areas of land and the ability of local communities to shape the state's initiatives to at least some extent. The attempt is to challenge the portrayal of the adverse role played by the British by arguing that it was the British who initiated systematic forest conservation policy in India is another significant area of Indian environment history. It has been argued that the original Greens in India were a colonial official. Colonial forest policy was rooted in an enlightened understanding of the environmental issues developed in particular by a group of remarkable Scottish medicos. serving in the colonies, who sought initially to understand the connection between climate and health. They also argued that there was a close connection between deforestation and environmental desiccation and pressed strongly for state-led conservation of forests. Through their pressure, the earlier laissez-faire attitude towards the forests was replaced from the mid-19th century onwards by the active management and control. The state-led conservation of forests were legitimized under the pretext of imparting modern knowledge or banishing the forest dwellers from their habitat for harming the forests. A balance between agriculture and forestry could be achieved by identifying lands suited to agriculture and marginal land could be developed as forests. Dear students, the primacy of the agriculture was thus quite evident. The availability of groundwater was also a related issue, often combined with soil erosion. At times, forest growth was considered harmful to groundwater as it sustained itself on the groundwater only. It brings out the fact that colonial concerns concerning forests were principally guided by covert economic considerations, though overtly predominated by the objective of conservation. The debate over the conservation of the environment was traced to the literary tradition of Romanticism, in which the nature of its pristine form aspired. The environment was to conserve, to protect the environment in its natural conditions. Similarly, the aboriginals of the forest were to be protected to conserve the primitive form of the environment. Dear students, another area of exploration has been the analysis of the various policies having a bearing on environmental issues. Vasant Sabharwal has made a major contribution to this field. He argues that there is a growing recognition within the academic ecological community of the complexities of ecosystem functioning and the limits to our predictive and explanatory capabilities about the large-scale ecological phenomena. His explanation brings it out that conservation concerns evolved over a longer period along with the growth in the scientific knowledge about the environment. He has also pointed out the role of the state in the appropriation of the scientific knowledge in support of its claims by the state. Dear students, the changing history of the encounters between humans and the animals has become another field of growing interest, both in terms of changing elite taste and the ground level conflicts and coexistence. In this context, the end of trial, the cheetah in the India, stands out. The author has attempted to trace the history of cheetahs in India, its origin, spatial distribution, attitude towards the animal, gradual erosion of a space for a big animal, and finally the extinction of the species. It is an important contribution that helps in the comprehension of complex relationships between fauna and society, especially the explanation that the extinction of the animal was caused by the side effects of the larger historical process and not as a direct process of elimination of the species as it was for other big games. Dear students, Rangarajan has also analyzed how and why certain types of animals were directly targeted and consequently became extinct. The very simple process of agriculture expansion has resulted in the gradual erosion of space for big animals. The shrinkage of the hunting area forced the animals to move in close proximity to the humans, resulting in violent encounters. Understanding environmental issue through in-depth regional histories have become the other area of exploration. The interplay of regional identity and ecological niche has come into sharper focus than in the past. Interestingly, there has been a few detailed micro-histories of a particular range of hills, a watershed or a valley system, a reserve forest or a princely reserve. Dear students, several studies are highlighting the problems with the British policies about the forest management, where monoculture has been a major issue and the exploitation of natural resources for a distant the elite who was least concerned with the social impact of such policies, a matter of great concern. The other trend in these studies for the forested region has been the analysis of impacts on the tribes living on the periphery of the settled agriculture. It is significant in the sense that since the tribes were not adhering to the practice of settled agriculture, the British were not able to tackle the tribes. So dear students, we will end today's lecture with these remarks that the above survey of the literature can at best be treated as cursory, as it is not possible to examine all or even most of the writings on the environment within the frame of a unit. Recently, we have witnessed the growth of anthropological works to examine the contemporary social understanding of past environments. At the same time, there has been an ever-growing trend of field study-based works conducted to examine the feasibility of development policies concerning the environment. We have just outlined the beginning of writings on the environment of the past. It also examines the change in the methodology adopted to explore the hidden past and ecological context suggested by the sources. It is also for you to realize that the writings on the environmental history simply demand a closer examination of evidence and search for the non-human components of our past. With this, we conclude today's lecture. Hope you have understood well. Thank you.